team sports are great, but nothing compares, I think, to that sort of trainer-boxer relationship you get in the gym.
Here comes Father Dave, led out by Tony O'Loughlin. My goodness, Tony, I've known him since the 80s. God love him. He's been a great trainer in the Sydney region for a long, long time.
The punching priest, Father Dave. Tell you what, isn't that some entrance? He's actually a priest.
Yeah. At the veteran boxers, he always opens up the veteran boxers.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, let's introduce you to the two fighters here, the rematch. Last time they did it in New South Wales, this time they're doing it in Queensland. We fight 4 by a 2-minute round.
It was interesting. I still remember going to see the doctor, the boxing doctor, Dr. Lou, who's a friend of mine, and saying, well, how do I recover from this one, Lou? And he says, well, you don't. He said, you hang up your gloves. I said, well, I'm not ready to hang up my gloves. And I said, people recover from these injuries. He said, yeah, young people. He said, there's no way at your age you're going to fully recover from that. And I said, well, what if I do? He said, look, if you want, you wait 3 months, you get a CAT scan or an MRI, we have a look, and if you're 100%, but you won't be. But I was. I only waited 1 month. I got a CAT scan and an MRI just to be sure. And they said I was 100%. So I figured the good Lord wanted me to keep going. You know, I haven't worked out another way of raising funds or anything. You know, that was always the driving force, you know, for our boxing shows we were putting on, was we were just trying to raise money to keep our youth centre open over the years. That was always the thing which kept driving it. Look, I'm happy to travel anywhere to fight anyone at the moment. The Boxing Authority here makes it as difficult as possible for me. They don't make it easy for me to renew my licence, and they called off one fight while I was warming up in the dressing room because my opponent was supposedly too young. You know, it's been difficult in that regard. So, yes, if anybody out there can get me a fight, I'm keen. As I say, Bill and I were both thinking, let's do it in the Citadel in Aleppo in Syria if we can. But quite frankly, I'll take him anywhere, anytime. We can do it. Let's get it on. Well, when we started in Dulwich Hill in Sydney was very different from Dulwich Hill in London area, where we were the heroin capital of the inner west of Sydney. You know, we just had kids dying every year. You know, we'd have a group come in each year, you know, because we were right next to the school. And at the end of the year, some of those kids will have died and others will be in jail and others will have made it through. And the ones who are boxing with us tended to make it through. That was the bottom line. So we ran a specific get off the gear, get into the ring program. The gear meaning heroin, which was the big issue in our area during the 90s. Kids who take up boxing tend to, if you're well-heeled and doing great, boxing is probably not your sport. People who want to fight, they generally have enemies, or they're generally angry, or, you know what I mean, they've got their issues they want to work through. So the boxing club was a magnet for the sort of kids we were trying to work with. And as I say, well, people say, you know, oh, well, yeah, it gives them a good outlet for all that energy and it helps them focus and set goals, all of which is true. But most fundamentally, we change their peer group. in the process. And I think there's nothing like the motivation, knowing you've got your amateur debut coming up, and thinking of that image of the guy lying on his back with the other guy basically with his foot on him and his hand in the air. You don't want to be that guy lying on your back. So when your mates come into the gym and say, hey, we're going to do a roll or a break and ender or whatever it is, you this guy saying, I think I need to train. Look, I like to fight close, and I think that reflects my background as a wrestler as well. But also, I think mainly because in all the training I'm doing, training the younger people, I'm never faster than anyone. So if I come in tight, it takes that out of the equation. I mean, I've sparred with people like Anthony Mundine, who's the fastest person I've ever sparred with. But most of the younger people in that, I can't match them for speed. I often can't see them coming. So I've got to deal with that somehow. So I close the distance, and I can, you can box in, you can infight with your eyes closed. I like to work in tight. I remember I've had much criticism from the medical establishment. I remember being on talkback radio with some doctor saying, you could be taking 10 years off the end of those boys' lives. I mean, saying, yeah, but I may be adding 30 or 40 to the front. I mean, I had that case exactly, I remember, with a young guy, and his mum had been murdered, and his father had suicided, and he was being brought up by his grandparents, and both his older brothers were both heroin addicts. And we picked up this boy when he was 11 years old, I think, and we worked with him with the boxing program. And at 12, he'd had 3 fights, I think, and he was going really well. And then our government banned kids under 13 fighting. And within a couple of months, he was on heroin as well. Thanks a lot.
Please make welcome firstly. He'll fight from the blue corner, 75.9 kilograms. He's trained by David Virtual from toe to toe of boxing tonight. He makes his debut in the Road Arena. Introducing the heavy out of Kingsgrove, New South Wales, Alice D. And the opponent was on his white from the red corner, 75.3 kilograms. He handles out Darling Hill, New South Wales, and is trained by Kenny Suckers. Holy Trinity Gymnasium, introducing fighting Father Dave.
When I've gone through, particularly my first marriage breakdown, basically drinking myself to sleep and thinking, well, I can see where this is going. What else do I enjoy apart from drinking? Well, I enjoyed training, so I every time I felt like a drink, I went for a run and ended up becoming a professional athlete instead of an alcoholic. Probably lost about the same number of brain cells either way, but I think it was definitely the right choice. That level of boxing became a form of therapy for me. And it also then it really clicked with me that we can use this as a form of therapy for the young people, particularly we want to be working with. You've got 2 guys standing there in their underwear. There's not much pretension, is there? It really doesn't matter what car you drive or what faith background you're from or any of those things. It's just one body and another body, and it's a great equalizer. I still remember one guy he'd had 3 straight knockouts, I think, and he says, I don't think God wants me to fight anymore. I said, yeah, he does, mate, but he'd resolved his own issues, and I think for a lot of people, their fighting comes out of their battle. So often when that battle's resolved, they move on to something else. That's okay. I don't know how you thank boxing for what it's given you. Isn't it fantastic, what we've been able to do with this? And not just me, but I mean, historically, you think of the role boxing played in South Africa, bringing black and white people together. You think of, Nelson Mandela used to be an old boxer. You think the way we've been able to use boxing, in Syria to bring people together there, or in, Manus Island here amongst Muslims and Christians in this country, or working with kids with heroin issues, is more than a sport, boxing. It's a way of life, and it's a whole community. I know it's very politically incorrect nowadays, boxing. At a distance, it can just look like violent thuggery. I appreciate that. But when you get up close and you see what we're doing up close and personal, it's life-giving. If I could weed baskets or something, I guess I'd be doing that and saving the brain cells. But, I can preach and I can punch. That's about it. This is Father Dave, and you're listening to the Boxing Asylum podcast.